Your sexual desire is not a craving. It's a confession, a quiet one, one you've been making to yourself long before you ever noticed it. Most people think desire is about pleasure, about attraction, about chemistry. Carl Jung saw something far more unsettling. He believed desire is the unconscious speaking in symbols, and what you desire is never accidental. In a moment, you'll understand why the person you want the most is often the person who awakens something unfinished inside you. Something unresolved, something real. Stay with that thought, because if Jung was right, and he usually was, then your sexual desire isn't about who you want to touch. It's about who you are trying to become. You felt this before, that pull towards someone you couldn't fully explain, not just physical, something deeper, heavier, almost dangerous. You told yourself it was chemistry, timing, fate, but it lingered longer than logic allowed. Jung would say that was your shadow knocking. The shadow is the part of you learned to hide to be accepted, the confident instinct you muted, the emotional depth you buried, the power you were told was too much. And desire is how the shadow tries to come back into your life. This is where people misunderstand sexual psychology, especially in dating. They try to control desire, suppress it, perform for it, manipulate it, but desire doesn't respond to effort, it responds to presence. Think about the moments you were most attractive, not when you were trying, but when you were grounded. Calm, unrushed, when you weren't chasing approval. Women feel this instinctively, not because they're mystical, but because emotional intelligence is wired deeply into feminine psychology. A woman doesn't respond to words first, she responds to emotional safety. And emotional safety isn't created by reassurance. It's created by consistency and restraint, by a man who doesn't need to announce himself, who doesn't explain his worth, who doesn't rush intimacy to soothe his own uncertainty. Jung understood this dynamic long before modern dating ever confused it. He believed attraction emerges when two unconscious worlds recognize something familiar in each other. That's why desire feels irrational, why you can't negotiate it away, and why silence, real silence, not withdrawal, can feel intoxicating, because silence creates space, and space invites projection. When you are calm in your presence, when you don't overreact, overtext, or overexplain, something subtle happens in her mind. She begins to feel, not pressure, not urgency, but curiosity. And curiosity is the beginning of desire. You see, female desire isn't loud, it's watchful, it asks questions quietly. Is he stable? Is he self-directed? Does he need me or does he choose me? These questions are never asked out loud, but they are always answered emotionally. This is why absence, when done unconsciously, can feel so powerful. Not disappearing to provoke anxiety, but knowing when not to intrude, knowing when to let silence breathe. Jung would say this activates the unconscious imagination. When you're not constantly available, her mind fills in the gaps. And what she imagines often carries more emotional weight than anything you could say. But here's the part most men miss. This only works when your absence is grounded in self-respect, not strategy. Desire recoils from neediness, but it leans towards centeredness. If you pull back to manipulate, she feels it. If you pull back because you're whole, she senses that too. And that difference changes everything. Think of a time you felt drawn to someone who wasn't trying to impress you. They weren't distant, they weren't cold, they were simply complete. That completeness is magnetic because it mirrors something the unconscious longs for. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. Desire often points directly toward it. This is why certain women awaken parts of you that feel raw, why their presence stirs confidence or insecurity you didn't know was there. They aren't creating those feelings, they're revealing them, and the same is true in reverse. When a woman feels drawn to you, it's often because you represent something she hasn't fully integrated yet. Stability, freedom, emotional depth, strength without force. She doesn't want to possess it, she wants to experience it. That's why trying to win her never works. You can't conquer what is meant to be felt. Real attraction isn't built by escalation, it's built by regulation. By how you hold your emotions, by how you respond under pressure, by how little you need validation to stay grounded. This is where sexual desire quietly transforms into romantic tension, not through explicit action, but through emotional restraint. A look held a second longer than necessary, a pause before you speak. The confidence to let moments remain unresolved. These moments speak directly to the unconscious. And the unconscious listens closely. In a moment, you'll see why the things you crave most in intimacy are often the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, and how understanding this changes the way women experience you entirely. Because once you stop trying to control desire, it starts revealing the truth. And that truth is far more powerful than attraction alone. There's a reason desire intensifies when things are left unfinished. The unanswered message. The conversation that pauses right before meaning settles. The connection that feels real but not fully defined. Your nervous system reacts to uncertainty. So does hers. Jung believed the unconscious mind is activated most powerfully not by answers, but by symbols. And silence is one of the strongest symbols there is, not the awkward silence of insecurity, but the composed silence of someone who doesn't rush to fill space. When you stop trying to manage every emotional outcome, something shifts. You stop performing, you start inhabiting yourself. This is where masculine presence becomes tangible. Presence isn't dominance, it's steadiness. It's the feeling that you are not being pulled by her reactions, that you can remain emotionally upright whether she leans in or pulls back. Women are exquisitely sensitive to this, not consciously, emotionally. A woman doesn't relax into desire when she feels she has to manage your emotions. She relaxes when she feels she can explore her own. That's why men who overshare early, who rush vulnerability without emotional grounding, often feel confusing to her. It's not that depth repels her. It's imbalance. Depth without containment feels unsafe. Jung would say this triggers the mother archetype rather than the lover. She begins to soothe instead of feel, support instead of desire. And desire cannot grow where caretaking takes over. This is why boundaries are so misunderstood. Boundaries are not walls, they're clarity. They signal that you respect your inner world enough not to hand it over prematurely. When you don't chase reassurance, when you don't demand consistency before it naturally forms, when you allow attraction to unfold instead of forcing definition, you communicate emotional maturity without saying a word. This activates a deep layer of feminine psychology. Because a woman's desire often deepens when she feels chosen, not needed. Chosen implies freedom, needed implies pressure. Jung understood that polarity is psychological before it is physical. Masculine energy is direction, feminine energy is responsiveness. When you are rooted in your direction, your values, your rhythm, your self-respect, you create space for her to respond authentically. Not because you withdrew, but because you didn't collapse. Think of the man who listens without interrupting, who doesn't rush to fix her emotions, who doesn't react defensively to her moods. He doesn't disappear, he stays centered. That calm becomes a mirror. She begins to feel her own emotions more clearly in his presence. And clarity is arousing. This is where desire stops being purely sexual and becomes psychological intimacy. And psychological intimacy is what makes physical intimacy unforgettable. But here's the paradox. The more you try to create desire, the more it slips away. The more you focus on becoming someone who can hold it, the more naturally it arrives. Jung would say this is because desire follows integration. When you stop rejecting parts of yourself, the quiet strength, the emotional restraint, even the fear, you become whole. And wholeness is attractive. This is why women often feel drawn to men who seem unaffected by external validation. Men who don't need constant confirmation to feel secure. Not cold, not detached, just internally anchored. This anchoring allows you to tolerate emotional tension without escaping it. Intention is the heartbeat of desire. When you don't rush to resolve uncertainty, when you let moments breathe, when you allow her curiosity to grow instead of feeding it immediately, her unconscious begins to engage. She starts wondering, not does he like me, but why do I feel drawn to him? And that question is far more powerful, because once desire becomes self-generated, it no longer depends on your effort. It becomes hers. Desire deepens when it doesn't feel managed. That's the quiet truth most people never learn. When you try to guide attraction too carefully, checking signals, adjusting behavior, chasing reactions, you remove the very uncertainty that allows desire to grow. What's left is predictability. And predictability feels safe, but it rarely feels intoxicating. Jung believed the unconscious is drawn to what feels alive, not what feels controlled. This is why desire often rises in moments when nothing is being done. A shared silence, a glance that lingers, a conversation that drifts without direction. These moments don't advance the connection on paper, but emotionally they deepen it, because they allow both people to feel rather than evaluate. In modern dating, many men confuse effort with value. They believe showing more interest will create more attraction, but interest expressed without self-containment often feels heavy, not grounding. Women don't pull away because a man cares. They pull away when they feel responsible for how much he cares. This is where emotional intelligence quietly separates presence from pressure. Presence says, I'm here grounded and open but not dependent on the outcome. Pressure says, I need this to work so I can feel okay. The unconscious always senses the difference. Jung spoke often about projection, the process by which we place unconscious parts of ourselves onto others. Desire is full of projection. But projection only ignites when there is space to imagine. When you over-explain yourself, you remove that space. When you overreact emotionally, you collapse it. When you rush clarity, you dissolve tension. But when you stay centered, when you allow pauses, when you don't immediately resolve every emotional moment, you become a psychological canvas. And the unconscious loves a canvas. This is why silence, when rooted in confidence, feels intimate rather than distant. Silence says you are comfortable inside yourself, that you don't need constant stimulation to feel connected. This relaxes her nervous system. And when a woman's nervous system relaxes, desire doesn't disappear, it deepens. She feels safe enough to explore her feelings instead of managing yours. That's when attraction shifts from surface-level interest to embodied longing. Jung would say this is the anima responding. The anima represents the inner feminine within the psyche, emotion, intuition, depth. When a man is emotionally regulated, the anima feels invited rather than overwhelmed. This is why men who remain calm during emotional waves often feel magnetic without trying. They don't correct, they don't convince, they don't chase resolution, they listen, they hold space. They remain themselves, and something subtle happens. Her emotions settle not because she was controlled, but because she felt met. This creates a powerful emotional imprint, because most people are not truly met. They are reacted to, managed, or fixed. Being met feels rare, and rarity intensifies desire. This is also why boundaries create attraction when they are lived, not announced. A boundary isn't saying, "I won't tolerate this." It's simply not abandoning yourself when tension appears, not overcompromising, not overpursuing, not shrinking to keep the connection comfortable. When you stay aligned with yourself, even discomfort becomes attractive, because it signals self-respect. And self-respect is contagious. A woman may not consciously register it, but she feels it. And feeling is where desire lives. Think of a moment when you were drawn to someone who didn't bend under pressure. They didn't withdraw, they didn't comply, they stayed present. That presence created polarity. Jung believed polarity is essential to psychic energy. Without it, things stagnate. Desire needs tension the way fire needs oxygen. But tension doesn't mean conflict, it means difference. Two people grounded in themselves, not fused. This is why trying to merge too quickly kills attraction. When individuality disappears, curiosity fades. But when you remain whole, interested but not engulfed, you invite her to step toward you rather than feeling pulled. And when she steps toward you freely, desire becomes authentic. Here is the quiet ending most people never reach. Desire was never asking you to become more impressive. It was asking you to become more honest. Jung believed that when desire feels confusing, intense, or even painful, it's because it's pointing towards something unfinished inside you, not something missing outside of you. This is why chasing desire always feels exhausting, and embodying yourself feels relieving. When you stop performing attraction, when you stop negotiating your worth through attention, when you stop trying to be chosen, something settles. Your nervous system slows down, your reactions soften, your presence deepens. And this changes how women experience you in ways words never could. Because now when you speak, you're not asking for approval. When you listen, you're not waiting for reassurance. When you pause, you're not withdrawing, you're allowing space. That space is where desire lives. A woman doesn't fall into desire because you pursue her perfectly. She falls into it when she feels safe enough to feel herself around you, safe enough to be curious, safe enough to lean in, safe enough to wonder, and wondering is intimate. This is the difference between attraction that burns fast and attraction that lingers long after the moment passes. Jung would say that real desire is the psyche recognizing itself in another. Not need meeting need. Not emptiness meeting attention, but wholeness meeting wholeness. That's why silence can feel romantic when it's grounded. Why boundaries can feel warm instead of distant. Why absence can feel meaningful instead of threatening. Because none of those things are tactics. They are byproducts of self-respect. When you respect yourself, you don't rush intimacy to feel secure. You don't cling to attention to feel valued. You don't fear losing someone who was never meant to complete you. And paradoxically, this is when desire feels you most clearly. Not because you tried to awaken it, but because you stopped interfering with it. So if you take anything from this, let it be this quiet truth: your desire has never been your enemy. It has been your guide, pointing you toward integration, toward emotional maturity, toward a version of you that doesn't need to chase connection to feel alive. Sit with that, let it settle, and notice how differently you begin to show up, not just in dating, but in yourself. Because when you become someone who can hold desire without being ruled by it, you don't just become more attractive, you become more real, and real presence is unforgettable.